I'm here to talk to you about cyber due diligence today. And you might be asking yourself, do what? And I will explain that to you in a bit. But to introduce myself, I am Joakim Tauren. I am the CISO at the small business segment in Visma. Whoa! Suddenly God said there was light. I don't mind. The small business segment, it might be a bit misleading. It's actually not small. The customers that this segment serves are small, but we actually are the most profitable and the biggest segment, and we have some of the biggest Visma companies in that segment. But yes, I do about 40-ish due diligences per year. I'm 41 years old. I do probably about 42 failures per year. I probably have 43 important meetings per year. 44, 45. I thought it was just a nice continuum to have 40 something. So that's why I put there. But yes, I'm a dad of 3 girls, just like Jona. And it seems that it's kind of a requirement to be in the security group in Visma to have 3 girls, because my boss also has 3 girls. So quite a few of us have 3 girls. And I'm a hobby woodworker, and I really like fly fishing. And I would like to mention also that since I'm a hobby woodworker, my garage is my boardroom. So, before we get to due diligence, we need to clarify what M&A is. How many here know what M&A stands for? A few. Okay. So, it stands for mergers and acquisitions. And in Visma's case, it's actually more about acquisitions. So, buying companies. How many here have bought a company before? A few. Nice. At Visma, we're kind of like a big conglomerate. And if you look at the web page, the main Visma.com website, you will actually see a pretty significant section of it asking you to sell your company to us. That's basically how aggressive we are at buying companies. So I actually copy-pasted this from the website. Join the biggest SaaS network in Europe. So at current, we have about 178 companies in Visma. We have about 15,000 employees, 1.6 million customers. We operate in Europe and South America for the most part. Our revenue is about 2.3 billion euros. And here's also a screenshot from our website. What are the advantages of being a Visma company? So we are quite aggressive at buying companies, and we really love it. And as you could probably see from the title of this talk, we've done quite a few. And if we go back, 178 doesn't really match to the 200 I mentioned earlier, but that is because we've sold and merged some of the companies. So the numbers are fluent and they keep on changing. And this number was from last week. So this week it could be different again. So we always need to recheck, and probably we should have a counter for these more or less, because the pace we've been doing it at is mostly almost like 1 per week. And in some cases, I remember I've been in 4 due diligences in the same week. And what is buying a company? Well, it's kind of like if you think about shopping. How many here have been shopping? Yeah. Hullut päivät. Sometimes it felt like that when we were doing a lot of shopping for companies. But essentially, it's about us purchasing the company and the people that sell it, they're super happy. They get to join Visma and they get a lot of money. They become rich. So it's great for them. And it's great for us because we can get to help them to grow. And essentially, what we do then to make them grow more is we can utilize a lot of our expertise that we have in the group. And we have a lot of similar companies from other markets around Europe that can assist, for example, another company that is coming into the group to grow even more, hence create more profit, and then we can all become rich. So here's the M&A trend for the last 6 years. As we can see, in 2018, we had 23 deals, 2019, 17, and then it started going up a little bit. And I guess I have a typo. 2021 and 2022, we had 42 deals. I had a typo there, but those were like the current top years where we did a lot of M&A deals. And as you can see from this as well, you can kind of see how busy my side hustle at work has been, because this hasn't been my main job. So it's like, okay, as a side gig to my current job, doing quite a few due diligences per year. And if you look at the 2021 and 2022 years, it's almost one per week on average. And then if you consider not all of them going through, you have even more, right? So fun, fun, fun. And one of the things that is also good to consider is if you're doing anything and you're doing a lot of it, it kind of becomes mundane, like it becomes a daily task. And then it becomes kind of tedious at some point. In the beginning, it's like, oh, buying companies, it's great. And then when you've done a lot of them, then it's like, okay, we're buying another company. Okay, what's this about? And you get kind of used to it. It becomes a daily task, just like dishwashing. All right, so what is a DD, or due diligence? Well, it's a common business term due to the United States Securities Act of 1933, where the process is called reasonable investigation. I picked this up from Wikipedia, but I really like the part of reasonable investigation. So when we're acquiring a company, we have to do a reasonable investigation to figure out what are they doing, are the numbers they're showing, are they correct, etc. We need to look at the company. We need to actually do a reasonable investigation to ensure that what we are buying is what we're actually buying. So the sellers might give you, some more positive information about the company than it actually is, or vice versa. So you need to kind of create and do a reasonable investigation of what the company actually is. And if we look at some of the cases that we've had, for example, in Finland, maybe you remember case Vastaamo, or other cases like that, where maybe a proper due diligence would have been in place. That's something that you probably want to ensure, that you don't buy, for example, a company that has been hacked, or they've already been breached. The attackers are inside, they're just waiting for Visma to buy the company and then release hell. That's really something that we want to avoid and make sure that we don't fall into. But of course, you can never be 100% sure. And the other thing that is also a nice metric to know is that when we do due diligence and we go through the whole process, approximately 90% of the companies that enter the process are acquired. So most of them are not full of shit, basically. All right, so what does the M&A process look like when we're acquiring a company? So of course, first we have to look at interesting companies to buy. So we are sourcing and trying to find interesting companies to acquire. And for Visma, interesting companies are, for example, companies that might be boring to the common human being, like accounting, HR, finance, travel expense, all those things that you actually need in order to run a company. And basically the strategy for Visma, more or less, is to acquire companies that are doing or creating software that you need in order to run a company. So then, of course, we have people that have the first meeting with the company, and then when they've had their meetings, they've established interest on both sides, we have a letter of intent, and that letter of intent is then an intent to acquire the company. Then we have the due diligence process and deal finalization and integration process. And this is essentially the process that happens when you are acquiring a company. So let's look at the due diligence. So the due diligence process essentially is confirming the assumptions that the letter of intent is built on. So we basically need to ensure that whatever they are saying about their company and providing about their company, we need to ensure that the numbers are correct. We need to ensure a lot of different things that they are correct. And this is what the due diligence process is about. And the way that we do due diligence in Visma, since we've done quite a few, it's quite an established process so far. And we have 5 different tracks. We have the financial, the commercial, HR, legal, and technical. And usually each of these tracks have someone who is responsible for that track, and they need to ensure that all the information that is needed for this specific track is gathered and analyzed and then provided to the M&A team and whoever is in charge of acquiring that company. And we also need to make sure that between all these tracks, we have information flow. So let's say in a technical track, we find something that goes to legal or HR. We need to make sure that the red flags are gathered and every single track is aware of all the red flags in all the tracks. We need to make sure that everyone involved in the process is aware of all the possible pitfalls that would go into acquiring this company. So if we look at quickly at the financial track, we need to ensure that the revenue recognition, the cash EBITDA, and the recurring revenue are on par. They're according to what they're mentioning. A lot of times we use an external party like some of the big 3, not mentioning names, but some of the bigger companies that do financial due diligence, we quite often utilize them to ensure that the accounting and all the numbers are correct in the deal. And then the commercial model. Of course, we're in Finland, so at least one of my favorite sports is hockey. And if you look at the hockey stick model, it's essentially kind of the growth model of a successful company. We usually try to acquire the company when they're at that stage of the hockey stick. So they're about to start that big growth. We don't usually buy really big companies because they're usually quite complex. We don't buy companies when they're too young, when they're establishing themselves, starting to get into the market, etc. We kind of try to acquire them before they start growing. And then we, of course, in the commercial track, we look at the whole business model. We need to ensure that the pricing and packaging, we need to look at it, but we, for example, can help them improve it quite a bit. And then, of course, there's a lot of other things that we like to look at. One of the most important things is synergies within Visma. So, for example, if we're entering a certain country, we might have other companies in Visma that this company would then complement. So let's say they would offer payroll. So let's acquire the company that complements the entire set, and let's acquire the company that does payroll the best in that country. And of course, quite often we've also acquired companies that don't really have, for example, very good security. It's not that great. And then our job is to help them elevate that and make their security great. And that's part of where our group-wide services come in. So me and Jona and a lot of the other people in the Visma group, we help the company become better with regards to security. And then, of course, HR, kind of a little bit of my favorite side topic. We need to ensure that the culture is good. We will have one-on-ones with key individuals in the company. And we are also looking at employee agreements, how many of the people are actually working at the company, how many are consultants. But sometimes more importantly, during, for example, let's say a crisis, maybe a war in the world, we might want to be looking at where those people work from. Do we have people who work in Gaza? Do we have people that work in Russia? Do we have people who work from Ukraine? Eastern Ukraine? Crimea? These are all interesting things to look at, so we need to ensure that, because development, for example, so we obviously buy development companies, so companies that develop products, and developers can essentially be anywhere in the world, right? Well, yeah, that's great, but if they're sitting, in areas of war, for example, we might want to know, and then we ask the company, what are your plans for the risk? So what are your plans to mitigate the risk for these people that are working in these risky areas? And then, of course, we have legal. Sometimes we have IP right issues. We need to make sure that all the legal contracts with the customers are in place. We're looking at all the different contracts. Sometimes we might have issues where, let's say they need to go through almost their entire customer base to upgrade some contracts because there's issues in the contracts that we need to solve, sometimes even before closing. And then we have the technical track, where I like to promote my colleague, Håkon Ruud. He's a Norwegian guy. He's the tech due diligence lead, and he's in charge of all the technical due diligence that we do nowadays. And he's a terrific guy. He's very smart, and he essentially leads the entire technical track, and that includes security as a sub-track. All right, so what are the main purposes of doing due diligence? One of them is to identify any potential reason we should not execute on the letter of intent. So any red flags. Now, in the past, for example, we might have had, for example, technical debt that is just way too expensive. There's no point in acquiring this company because the technical debt is too expensive to fix. And of course, there's many other reasons why you would not want to end up acquiring a company, but that's just one example. And then, of course, if we find a lot of different things, we might want to evaluate how much that it costs to fix that risk. So let's say we have 1,000 findings, 1,000 different vulnerabilities, etc. How much would it cost for us to make sure that the company fixes those issues? So what is the investment, the level of investment needed to fix those issues? And then, of course, we need to ensure that the business case is solid, it fits Visma, it has good synergies with the other companies we have, it fits a market gap or a market need. And then, of course, we need to inform a potential onboarding of the company to Visma. And then one of the things we also always like to do during due diligence is to give a good impression of Visma. So we want to give a friendly impression. We want to make sure that the people that are selling their company are comfortable at selling it to us. So it's all about relationship building, making sure that you're friendly, making sure that you give good advice, and you're not judgmental. We usually used to say, like, we are not here to audit you, but we will ask a lot of questions, and if you don't know, just ask. And usually, for example, when we go through vulnerabilities with the company, I will explain what a certain vulnerability is. I will not sort of assume that they know things. My job is to make sure that I educate them on what these things are that we found, and I will not belittle them. I'll try to educate them and try to sort of, in a friendly way, explain the different things that we have found. And then, of course, we get to the really bad red flags. Sometimes we have companies with sort of like Swiss cheese security. It's not really a big problem for us. We can help them fix it. Sometimes there's crippling technical debt, and sometimes the Swiss cheese is just too molded that we don't want to get into that. And then sometimes you will see that there's sort of these weird mirages and dishonesty, that there's just things so wrong and they're just so dishonest about so many things that you just cannot rely on anything they're saying. And sometimes it's just complete mismanagement and incompetence. But most of the time, orange flags are more common, but they aren't blocking like red. So a lot of times we can fix the issues. All right, so what do we do for security in due diligence? We have three main things. One of them is cyber threat intelligence. The other part, because we buy software companies, is code scanning. And the third one is software composition analysis. So that's looking at third-party libraries and their licenses. And the reason why we have these three is because, for the most part, we're buying the company and the product. So we're buying the people and whatever they created. So we want to check whatever they created. We're not too worried about the other parts. Sometimes we are, but most of the time not. These are like our main concerns. So let's look at cyber threat intelligence, because that's actually a quite important step, particularly if we find something. Now, normally what we would find, like a really typical finding from cyber threat intelligence, would be that we find that on the dark web, this company has credentials for sale. And a lot of times, especially smaller companies, they have no idea that credentials to their service are being sold on the dark web. This is completely new to them, and I don't blame them. I mean, no small company probably should have anyone, wandering the deep dark web. But maybe, it's good for them to know. So we educate them and we show them, okay, this is what's happening. You have accounts for sale on the dark web. They cost about $5 to $10 each. So how do you protect your customers, right? It's not like, oh, you've done a bad thing. It's how do you protect your customers? And now that you know this, then how should you protect your customers? Do you have 2FA, MFA? What kind of protections do you have in place in your application? And then, of course, we will have leaked employee accounts. So we have data dumps all across the internet. You know, we will find those almost every time. And sometimes we will find open ports that maybe should not be there. Maybe we find open remote desktop, for example, and it could be interesting or it could not be. And usually what we try to do is we look at the entire attack infrastructure of the company. So Jona and the red team in Visma created this reconnaissance tool that we can use to scan the entire external attack surface of the company. Essentially, it's like an internal showdown, but faster and better. And the idea of that is essentially to get an overview of their entire attack surface so that we can see how bad it actually is. And it's not, most of the time, it's not about the small details, although sometimes it is. Mostly it's about looking at the overview. What does it look like? Does it look okay, or is it just horrible? If it's horrible, then we might want to pass. But usually, even if it's horrible, we can most of the time fix it to some extent. But I'll actually get back to this a little bit later. And we can go to the code scanning part. So we scan the code. We're using a tool called Veracode. And with Veracode, we ask them to compile a package of their application. And then through Veracode, we can find all kinds of vulnerabilities in their code. So sometimes we find all kinds of stuff, usually around, let's say, the average would probably be around 500 vulnerabilities per application. It can vary. It can be between 200 and 500 maybe, something like that. And the better ones are less than 100, and the worst ones are over 1,000. But we also have to remember that quite a few of these are possibly false positive. So even if you have 1,000 vulnerabilities, it doesn't mean you actually have 1,000 vulnerabilities. It could be that 500 or more are even false positives. So you really need to verify all those findings. And the way that we ask them to do it is usually to list them and then try to evaluate how many of these are false positives. And then we can also sometimes help them do that to some extent. And then evaluate how long would it take for you approximately to fix those issues. And then we have a software composition analysis. So we're using different tools for that. And what we're doing there is we're scanning the libraries, checking the versions of the libraries they have, because a large percentage of today's software is created by third-party libraries. So you're using a lot of libraries to create your application. And if you're not updating those libraries, you will be vulnerable to a lot of different things. And also sometimes if you're using libraries that, for example, use the AGPL license, you will be required to disclose your entire source code. So you would want to make sure that the company does not use third-party libraries that use certain types of libraries that have a certain licensing model. So AGPL, for example, being a good example of that, you want to ensure that they don't use AGPL. Sometimes we also find that they are using super old technology. Sometimes they're using technology so old that we can't even use this scan. And then it's like, okay, let's go back to Stone Age. Let's get some terminal servers up here and do something. So when we do all these things and then we go to discuss with the company, we want to see how they handle the results. Will they try to hide? Will they try to cover up? We look at all these things. Are they one-off mistakes or systemic problems? And of course, what is actually exploitable? So is something found, but it's not actually an issue? Or sometimes, if it's really bad and it's been there for a while, we might want to wonder if it has been exploited already. And sometimes we might want to ask them, for example, to address this now before closing. I'm getting some reverb. And then, of course, after they've fixed things, or maybe they haven't fixed things, but we have a lot of findings, then what is the residual cost and risk for the whatever is left? And then, yeah, I added a what's normal slide here, so about 100 to 1,000 vulnerabilities, which I mentioned before. Usually about 6+ months to plan and to fix. And I added a little bonus here because we usually ask, like, have you had any security incidents? Like, when we ask questions, not just use tools, but we have a few questions. It's not many questions, but one of the questions is like, have you had any security incidents? And the most common answer is no security incidents. And usually it's just because they don't know, obviously. But sometimes they might have had something and then they won't tell us. And then let's say we find out and we confront them. And then they say, okay, yeah, we actually did that. Yeah, we forgot about that. Then that's kind of fine. Like, it depends. You really have to read the situation a lot of times. And but yeah, this is like the most common response. And what we can say with 200 or so due diligences so far, if you have a small company or even medium size, it really doesn't take much to be above average. Just like use at least one tool, and that will like get you above average. Or use modern technologies, actually. That's also another thing. That will also get you quite a bit above average. Use modern development techniques, technologies, processes. You'll be way above average. I mentioned earlier about mirages, and I kind of touched upon it recently as well. And you might wonder, what does that mean? Essentially, I kind of want to get to one of my favorite areas of this process. Because we're buying companies. Companies are created by people. People work at those companies. And we are essentially buying what the people create, right? So the people part in the due diligence process is massive. And sometimes you will have people who will try to create smoke and mirrors. It could be a conversational distraction, or it could be monologues, because a lot of times in due diligence you have a specific allotted time that you're allowed to discuss with the other party, right? So if you have things to hide, maybe you want to speak a lot about irrelevant questions, or do like a politician, don't even answer the question. And it's infuriating. It's so annoying when someone is just, like, you ask them something and they just speak about something else. And you break them off and you're like, what do you mean? You're not even answering the question? Not directly like that, but you're trying. Now I'm saying it like that, but usually we try to be more polite, and it's like, what? And it's really frustrating. And a lot of times, and sometimes we might actually ask the target, for example, to remove someone from the technical due diligence because they're not advancing the process, and we might need to ask for a new meeting with other people. And that can really be quite difficult sometimes. And sometimes you will also see people trying to do it, and then you can kind of like out them in the process during the meeting. And then they might sort of agree, okay, I don't know everything, and we can't involve everyone in the company. We can't involve this certain person because he would know or she would know everything, but we can't involve them because of the process of acquiring our company. So we don't want people to know. But then you might be able to convince them, for example, to include a certain individual if it's really needed for the process. But like I said, it's really quite interesting, the people perspective. But most of the time, they're super honest, they're super transparent. What you see is what you get. Like, they have their heart on their sleeve. It's like, this is us, this is our product. We're not that great at this. We have no idea about security, but we're kind of trying a little bit. And this is usually the way that it is. And also, they're usually quite transparent about their shortcomings. And when they are, that's usually for us an opportunity to promote Visma and what we can offer to help them to make that part better. And that's, of course, something we need to always do and make sure that we promote Visma because we want them to sell their company to us because we see value in that. So we obviously want to make sure that we can promote the different powers that we have and we can provide to them to make their company even better. So, with that being said, there's some things I've seen. This is actually one of our targets. And I went to the data center, their office, and I took this picture. No, I'm kidding, it's AI generated. The idea that this is supposed to reflect is that some of the technological debt that some of these companies have is absolutely massive. Like, you would think sometimes that this is really built during the Stone Age when people were carving things in stone. So yeah, we've had cases where we haven't bought a company due to large technical debt because it's just very expensive to build. It's probably easier to build that same software from scratch than to fix all the things that are wrong with it. And then, things I've dispatched. So this is a picture of our Security Operations Center guys. I call them the Sherlock Holmes of cyber. This is one of our main guys there. So earlier I mentioned that we do this reconnaissance thing where we look at open ports and things like that. In some cases, we've actually done some forensics. So before we acquired the company, we're like, yeah, that's great, but we would like to do forensics on a few things in your network to ensure that there's no intruders inside. Is that okay? We're just going to install a few things. And it's been okay so far. And we've actually been quite lucky, and we haven't found anything where there has been intruders inside, so that's great. But like I mentioned before as well, we are in the people business of people creating things in software that people use for people that run businesses, if that makes sense. I was trying to make sense. But yeah, so I kind of wanted to also share some of the things that I think about when I'm doing due diligence, so signs I look out for. So one of them is avoiding answering questions, so conversational distraction and smoke and mirrors and things like that. Sometimes it could be due to incompetence, actually. And it's not because they don't know the answer. They're just not the right person to answer the question. So you need to find someone who can answer the question. It's just incompetence in that certain field. Or just lack of knowledge. And trying to disguise it is also quite often. So they try to kind of answer it, but they don't really answer it. And you can see that they don't really know. But sometimes the worst is covering up, like intentionally covering things up. And then talking for a long time. And it's funny because you could use it for conversational distraction, but sometimes it's actually because they just love talking about it. Like it could be just honest passion. Like first it might be like, well, why? But then it might actually be because they're just really passionate about it. Or they're purposefully wearing out the clock, or they're covering up. Other telltale signs. When we do due diligence and we have this technical part, for example, they always have the webcams on, so we can look for signs of body language or facial expressions. So one of the things is, I don't know if you know this, but like a basic thing is like if you look, I think it's up to the left, then you're basically giving signs of potential lying. Or you have nervous hand movements, kind of like doing the Macarena. Or you can actually see from their upper body that their feet are moving nervously, like that. That's usually also a sign of something. But of course, you need to combine all these things. And then, of course, there's facial tics. So you have like, I can't really fake it properly, but all kinds of different facial expressions and tics and all kinds of things that you need to try to combine into a conclusion based on the things that they answer, based on the things that you ask. So a lot of it is basically trying to compile everything, all the technical data you have, all the conversational data you have, all the things you've seen, etc. A lot of it is kind of based on feeling at the end. It's sometimes just the general atmosphere. Usually you can like smell what the rock is cooking. It's about body language. It's about how they answer their questions, how they reply to your questions, and then something. Maybe there's a secret vibe, something you can't put your finger on it, but those people are awesome. You just know it. Like they're super transparent, and you can just feel it, and you can see it from everything they're doing and everything they're answering and so forth. You can just smell it. Sometimes we do run into some smaller issues. Some people don't want to upload their code to Veracode, but we have solutions for that. We can have NDAs in place, etc. Sometimes they might struggle to explain things. It could be also due to language barriers, etc. And sometimes the plans versus reality don't really mix up, but in general, we're just people in the people business. So yeah, that's all I had for today. So thank you very much. My bicep is hurting because of holding the mic. Questions?
So a question about body language. So how do you have some expert present who is evaluating it? Because generally you really need to know someone's baseline before you can evaluate whether some cue is a signal of lying or a signal of the person trying to come up with as good answer as possible. So how do you do that normally?
We don't have any expert for that, so it's generally the people that do due diligence are kind of like me. They're versed in a lot of different areas, and it's not all sort of based on 100% guarantee. It's and you know when we talk about it with the M&A team, we talk about it also with the HR track, etc. And we try to sort of compile some sort of vision of reality, whatever it may be. So we might have them be different in different types of tracks, for example, a certain individual, and then we have to combine that, and we have to, based on what we know and the knowledge we have, we need to come to a conclusion, basically.
Yeah. Another question. So I have done it. You have done it. And we kind of both have some sort of an idea. But what would you like to describe as a I still feel after doing this stuff that it's important, cool, and so on. But what would you? And I believe that many of the people in the audience do feel the same. But what would you describe as important qualities for people doing like everything is so abstract? What are the qualities of people that are important in doing either due diligence for security or the technical track in general?
Yeah, the qualities of the people that do it. Yeah, one of the key things that we've noticed that we can't just throw anyone at due diligence, because first of all, usually they come pretty quickly. So whoever needs to do it, they have to be able to kind of jump into it quite quickly. They need to be versed in social skills and technical skills, etc. So you have quite a difficult combo to find. So it's not that many people, for example, in our security team that can do it. Yeah.
All right. Do you pay attention to the CI/CD pipelines, the deployment frameworks, how the software actually gets out there?
Yeah, we ask a lot of development-related questions as well. So deployment frequency, CI/CD pipeline, programming languages, frameworks, all that jazz. Yeah.
I'm wondering about the part where you are being acquired potentially. You mentioned that there could be all kinds of problems. For example, too much technical debt, bad security. It would be easier for you to build it from scratch. If I'm being acquired, how would I manage this risk that you just see all my weak spots, my markets, my operations, my technology, and as a big company or some other company just builds the same product but better and faster?
So is the question about potentially us building whatever you already have instead of acquiring your company? Yeah, the risk of showing us everything and then we building it instead of acquiring you. Yeah, a lot of times these the companies that we acquire, for example, they don't have any secret sauce. It's not like a magical patent that will, destroy the competition, and if you reveal it to someone else. So even though, yes, you might, usually in the letter of intent, the idea is that we are already committed to buying you unless we find things that is like, no way. So you would have to have quite significant technical debt or other issues. And usually it's a combination of a lot of different things, including technical debt, that would result in us not acquiring the company. And when it comes to the risk of the company that is selling, then I would say you wanted to sell it, so you kind of have to show it as well. And with that comes the risk of you potentially revealing things that you might not want to reveal. But we, for example, we will probably not create a company to build the same thing that you do. We'll probably buy another one, a competitor. So, yeah.
So I'm curious about the timelines and the resources that you have to put into this DD in terms of, as you mentioned, you have a limited timeline to do this. And also, based on the early parts of the presentation, you only have about a week to deal with a single DD when it comes to your area, like the cybersecurity part. So just out of curiosity, in terms of ballpark, what types of, let's say, kind of man hours are you able to put in for a given small company D&D when it comes to the security part of things or the cybersecurity part of things?
Yeah, so we have a M&A team, and for the different tracks, we use a lot of the CEOs that we have in the Visma companies and other management. But for the security part, you mean? Essentially, it's one person per target. And I would say, depending on the expertise, it's probably one full day for one target. Yeah.
Thank you for the talk. Although it's the other side of the talk, how long does the average merger take after the acquisition if you have like 40 per year?
Yeah. So if we go back to the beginning of the slides, I mentioned mergers and acquisition. I drew a line over mergers. And essentially the way that Visma works is that we acquire you, the company, and we essentially let you keep on running the company independently. The only things we merge are parts of finance, maybe Google accounts and things like that. So it's very limited, the amount of things that we actually merge. And that essentially allows us to acquire a lot of companies. If we were to merge all of them into this great big corporation, we would not buy 40 companies a year, for sure.
All right, that's all the time we have for questions. There will be tons more. It was really inspirational topic and really good subject. I bet a lot of people would like to hear more about it. And
Yeah, just
give a
come
big
talk.
hand out for Joakim.